Alright, YouTubers, DMan2000 here, back to continue our discussion of modes and scales. And what we're going to talk about today is a continuation of Lesson 1. This is Lesson 2. And we're going to talk about how we can use a simple 4-note per string pattern that we learned last time to move up and down the neck and play modes and scales in any key, and also switch between the modes simply by keeping track of the root note. And before we continue, we're going to briefly recap what we talked about last time. So we're going to focus on the middle two strings, and we're going to use our pattern. This is our pattern, by the way, and we're going to apply it to the neck on the D and the G string, starting at the 3rd fret with our first finger on the D string. And we're going to put our 2nd finger on the 5th, 3rd finger on the 6th, pinky on the 8th, and then we are going to drop down 1 string to the G and repeat the pattern. Okay, so what we have is, and what we said about that was that what we're doing is we're playing a major scale with the root note here under our 3rd finger on the top of the pair of strings. And so essentially this note here that's under our 3rd finger is our major root for the key that we want to play in. In this case, it's an A flat. So what we did there is we played an A flat scale, an A flat major scale. And you know, by the same token, wherever we move our finger on the top pair of strings, the note that's under our 3rd finger is our major root. So if we slide it down here to D and we repeat the pattern, what we've done there is we've played a D major scale. Now if we skip up to the top 2 strings, the low E and the A, and shift back 2 frets, starting with our 1st finger on the 1st fret, and play the pattern, we said that we have a matching scale with our root note here also on the top pair of strings underneath our 3rd finger. And if we jump down to the 2 high strings, the B and the E, and make a, starting on the 6th fret, make a 1 fret adjustment for the tuning between the G and the B, and repeat our pattern, we said we have a another matching major scale with our root note here on the under our 3rd finger on the B string. And so what we've done essentially is we've played 3 major scales across the neck that are in fact the same scale in different registers, and so those scales are octaves of each other. And that's very useful because when you're playing, you might have the right scale, but you want a slightly higher or lower voicing, and this will allow you to do that, and will also help you get down the neck very quickly if you need to. So now what we're going to talk about is how we can use this to play the various modes of the major scale using our same pattern. And we're going to go back to the middle 2 strings here, and we're going to say that this is our major root on the 6th fret of the D string. And so what we talked about last time was that this note, which is our pinky note, and this note here are the same note, and those are in fact our Dorian notes, or our Dorian root notes for this pattern. And so if we said that this is our major root, major being the 1st position or the 1, because our major note in any key is going to be our 1 note, and the Dorian, which is the 2nd mode of the major scale, is the 2 note. So if we were going to compare this to a conventional scale pattern where you have your notes 1 through 7, and when you start to study the modes and learn that the differences between the various modes are really about which notes are sharped and flatted. So if we know this is the 1 note, this is our 2 note, drop down to the G, that's also a 2 note because that's our Dorian note. We have a 3 note here, 4 note here, the 5 note here, jumping back up to our D string on the 3rd fret, our 6th note, our 7 note, and back to our 1 or root note. So the reason that's useful is because, let's say you're referencing a scale that has a flatted 3rd or a sharp 4th, or whatever, you can choose to substitute the notes in order to match that scale. So for instance, if we were down here and we know this is our 2nd or Dorian root, that makes this our 3rd root note. We're going to talk about what note that actually is in a minute, but this is our 3rd, and so if we wanted to sharp the 3rd, then we would use this note, and if we wanted to flat it, we would use this note. So that's a convenient way to keep track of what your scale notes are and to easily kind of adapt on the fly if you want to play let's say a scale with a sharp 4th or something like that. You can make those substitutions. Now, going back to what we were talking about in terms of modes, so we said this is our major root, and we said that this is our Dorian root, and of course the major scale and the Dorian scale are 2 very popular scales or modes within popular music, and so they're important to be familiar with. The major is also known as the Ionian mode. So the major scale is equivalent or equal to the Ionian mode, and Ionian is another name for the major scale. So the next thing I want to talk about is how we can find our minor root, because when you're dealing with pentatonics and things like that, major and minor are important to keep track of. And so if this is our major root, then here on the top of the pair of strings, our 1st finger note is also our minor root note. So now we know how to play a major scale by moving the pattern up and down the neck. We know how to play a Dorian mode scale by moving the same pattern and locating our pinky on the root note we want to play. And now we have a way to play a minor scale. In this case, here on the 3rd fret D, it would be an F minor. And of course, if we jumped up and back 2 frets and repeated that, we would be playing an F minor scale, and the same thing down here at the 6th fret. So you may be saying to yourself, okay, that's interesting, but how can we be playing one scale in one pattern in one position without moving our fingers or changing any of the notes, and it's actually 3 different scales? And that is a good question. The reason for that has to do with the way that the modes relate to each other. When we said that our major note was our 1st note of the scale and Dorian was the 2nd, and again we drop down to Dorian here, and we have a 3rd, 4th, and 5th, well, the major scale has 7 modes that are all positions of the major scale, and that's why. So in actuality, this note here, if we say that it's A flat major where we started, and this note which we said was F minor, those are equivalent, or those are the same scale. And another name for the minor scale is the Aeolian mode. And Aeolian is the 6th position of the major scale, and we said that this was our 6th note in the major scale. So that's where our root comes from. And obviously if we move this down, let's say we take this from where we're at down to D, then we have just played a minor or Aeolian scale or mode with our minor root being on the D. So if we were playing in a key and playing in the key of, a minor key, D minor, we could use this mode. and it would work with any chords that are in that key. Now, we've talked about our minor root, our major root, and our Dorian root. So the next thing we want to talk about is, if this is our minor root, what is this note? And actually, I'll go ahead and use my second finger so that we can keep consistent with the pattern. And that would be our Locrian root. The Locrian mode is the 7th mode of the major scale. So again, anywhere on the top of each pair of strings, so this would be true for the B string, the 2nd string, the D string or 4th string, and the E or 6th string, and we take our second finger and move it, then we are playing a Locrian scale in that key. So if we start here and slide down to our D, then that's a D Locrian scale. Now, that covers the top pair of the strings, and so if we go back to our major root, and this is our Dorian root, and drop down to the bottom of the pair, and we already know that this is a Dorian root also, and so what we have here is the second position on the bottom, second note, so Dorian, which is actually going to be the 3rd position of our major scale. That's our Phrygian note. This is our Lydian note, and the pinky note on the bottom string is our Mixolydian note, root note. These are all root notes, and essentially they're all equivalent to each other, so that we can now reference this note to, say, the equivalent mode and key of a major scale. So if we were down here on the G string and we said that this note was A sharp or B flat, then we could reference that to our A flat Dorian, A flat major root here. Okay, and so now we have all 7 of the modes of the major scale, and we can now easily transpose between the various modes and scales simply by putting the appropriate finger that we want for the appropriate mode on the root note that we want. And so the way that this works, and this is true for, again, the top pair of each of the 3 pairs of strings, this would be our Aeolian or minor root, this would be our Locrian root, this would be our major or Ionian root, and the pinky note would be our Dorian root. And then similarly, if we drop down to the bottom of the 2 strings for each pair, then this becomes our Dorian root, this becomes our Phrygian root, this becomes our Lydian root, and this becomes our Mixolydian root, the pinky. And so the way that I remember that is by taking the first letter or 2 from each of the modes and making a little kind of mnemonic device or out of it. And so this would spell A-lid. And so if we were here, this is Aeolian, Locrian, Ionian, Dorian, and when we drop down, it spells deep lime. So Dorian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian. Okay, and so I find that an easy way to remember it. But the important thing to keep in mind is that what you have is this. If you know which root note corresponds to which finger, it's not about the guitar neck, it's not about memorizing rote memorization or memorizing positions. It's simply about knowing which finger is your modal root and putting it over the note that you want to play in the key that you want to play and repeating that pattern. And so it's very useful, very fast, and it produces some really exciting results. I'm trying to keep these lessons down to about 15 minutes. So the last thing that I want to talk about is how then to switch between modes. And it's really very simple. You know, we said, so for instance, here we're on the major root here, and so we would be playing, we said, an A flat major scale. So what do we do if we decide we want to play an A flat minor scale? Okay, it's very simple. We're going to pick this finger up. We're going to put our first finger on the exact same note, the A flat, and we're going to repeat our pattern for the pair of strings that we're on, and that is going to let us switch from major to minor. So we went very quickly and easily from an A flat major to an A flat minor scale, and by the same token, if we were on the major root and we wanted to play an A flat Dorian scale, we would take our pinky and that would be our Dorian root. So we've shifted everything back one position, and that is our A flat Dorian scale. And that will work for each pair of strings everywhere on the neck up to the 12th fret and beyond, because the neck repeats after the 12th fret. And so that is what's going to let you easily transpose between modes and keys, and essentially modes and keys more or less simultaneously if you need to. And that's a very useful thing to be able to do. So that's pretty much it for this lesson. Next time, what I'm going to talk about is how this kind of plays into conventional music theory and also conventional guitar teachings in terms of pentatonics and so forth, so that you have this tool and you can slip modes in to your playing and switch back and forth between pentatonic shapes and this shape that I'm showing you, and kind of get a more useful roadmap or view of the entire neck and what's available to you, within each key. So that's it for now. Feel free to leave comments. See you next time. Peace out.